Thank you.
And
And thanks so much. And thanks for joining us, everybody. Can everybody see the presentation on the screen? Okay, great. So thank you, Savannah, again, and crew at Indigenous Wellness for having me once again. This is my second presentation. So obviously I didn't do too poorly the first time if I was invited back, but I'm so excited to be here again and for you to allow me to talk about one of my favorite topics in the whole world, plants, for at least an hour. I've got a lot of slides, but we're going to do a little stretching in between, and there's lots of photos and stuff. And like Savannah mentioned, we really want this to be interactive. So please feel free to put up your hand. I know that there's a few moderators looking at that. If you have a question in between, it's not going to wreck the flow or anything. So we're good at keeping this as interactive. If you want to share something too, like Savannah also said, we're always learning, and I do love to learn from other people who work with plants. So I'm always excited for other people to share. And you know, this is crazy that we're doing a virtual plant walk. Like if somebody would have told me that I would be doing a virtual plant walk a year ago, I honestly would have thought that they were crazy. So I'll just introduce myself at the beginning here. My name is Robynne Edgar, and I am a plant geek. I'm a plant lover. I've been studying herbal medicine in a formal way for about 10 years, but I have been a plant lover my entire life. I'm coming to you from beautiful Cowichan territory on the Quecksella River in Shawelican, otherwise known as Shawnigan Lake. My mother is the late Setsuko Matsuno, and I have Japanese ancestry, as you can probably tell from the picture of me and my late mother. And my father is Robert Thomas Edgar, and he's Cree Métis, and our homelands are from Batoche. So my mom is really who instilled the love of medicine and plants into myself. We harvested when I was a very young girl. We started with mushrooms in the mountains of Hope, BC, where First Blood, for anybody probably 40 plus, was filmed. Awesome movie with Sylvester Stallone. And we did a lot of crabbing in the ocean. We would have our chest waders and our potato sacks, and people thought we were mad walking through the eel grass, but it was some of my favorite memories. And it really made the foundation of who I am today. I also love to acknowledge the very important mentors and friends in my life. And many of you probably know a lot of these people. Jerry wasn't able to open for us today. He's been such a great friend to me, a mentor and elder, Alec Nelson. And then we have Nancy Turner from the University of Victoria, who's an ethnobotanist and has done some incredible work in our Indigenous communities over several years and has awesome books out there. So I encourage you to check out any of her books. And then my more formal teachers, I say I've done 2 full-year herbalism apprenticeships under herbalist Jessie Delman, and then of course Elise Crone. And it's so nice to have Myrna Crosley on the line because she also joined me in my very first herbalism apprenticeship. I also want to share that part of my journey as an educator is to really get folks back onto the land. And a huge part of that for me is just revitalizing our traditional medicine knowledge and community. So I love to educate. I'm actually, probably a lot of you wouldn't know this about me, but I'm quite a shy person. I'm pretty introverted, but when I talk about plants, I become a total extrovert. So I just feel super honored to be able to share my love and passion about plants with you all. Like I said, I'm going to talk a lot today. And some of you who might have been on my spring presentation around nettles, there'll be a couple duplicate slides, but I do want to talk just about a little bit of foraging basics. I'm not sure how many of you have experience harvesting medicines for food or medicine. Just a couple do's and don'ts. We'll go on a little virtual plant walk together. I'm going to try to pick plants that were actually in season now, like generally across the province. Some of you might be calling in from other areas, but I'm hoping that some of you guys will go out and harvest some of these medicines over the next week, or at least be able to recognize them. And then we'll get into the good stuff. We'll talk about some plants for first aid, and I'll give you lots of examples and stories on how I've used them in the past. So any questions so far? Nope. Okay, great. So foraging, and again, we're talking about land-based healing, and these are all of the examples of what harvesting does for myself and my spirit. It's an incredible way to get your physical activity as well. And I'm not sure who knows this, but physical activity boosts dopamine levels and serotonin levels in your body. And that can really help improve your mood and can contribute to helping with anxiety or any panic attacks. It also reduces stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol in your body. That's probably another presentation completely, but for me, if I'm not out on the land at least 2 or 3 times a week, my family kicks me out and tells me to go out onto the land because I get very, very grumpy, and it just feeds my spirit like nothing else. The physical activities, you can see my young son on the left there jumping up for some fir tips, my other son in the middle lunging for some berries. I'm off on the logging roads on my bike in the right. So it's a physical event, and it definitely keeps me moving. There's a funny story with the picture on the bottom left. My son Coleman is a little bit younger, but there's some turkey tail mushrooms on that tree, and I had to put them on my shoulders because they were way too high. I couldn't reach them. So you never know what kind of adventure you're going to get into when you're harvesting. And I don't know what nurtures your spirits, but we would love to hear from you guys in the chat box if you want to share some stories. If we were all in the room together, I'd be asking you all, like, how do you nurture your spirit? What do you love to do? So just feel free to share that with the participants in the chat box. So some important things to consider if you are contemplating going out to harvest medicines there's a lot of cultural protocols that you may want to follow, and to find out whose land that you're on, and do you have permission to be harvesting on that land, and what does that look like? I like to give back to the land. I plant my own native medicine gardens, so that really contributes to a healthy ecosystem and biodiversity. Many of the plants we harvest for food and medicine attract beneficial insects. So I like to try and plant as many native plants as I can. So that is a great way to reciprocate to the land that you're harvesting on. Removing invasive species, connecting with the nation that you're harvesting on, maybe making some medicine for the community as well. But all in all, just a really good first step practice to find out what territory that you're on, and do you have permission to be there and harvest on the lands. Other cultural protocols might be different for all of you. Some like to offer tobacco to the plant before they harvest. Others will sing, others will drum. I'm more of a quiet person when it comes to my harvesting, and I really just like to kind of sit with the plant, and people think I'm crazy, but have a little moment with it and just do a little plant sit and observe it. And I do that throughout the year as well. There's really no right or wrong way to do it. It's just really whatever feels best for you. Some will offer tobacco. If you don't have a medicine pouch or tobacco, you can offer a piece of your hair. Again, just whatever feels right for you. Also super important to think about environmental contaminants. There are a lot of the plants out there that they call bioaccumulators. Stinging nettle is one of them, horsetail is another. And that just means that they absorb heavy toxins from the land and chemicals. So you want to be really careful to find out about the land you're harvesting on. Was there maybe a gas station there before? Is it a dog park? Maybe it's downstream from an old industry or farmlands where they might have hormones or chemicals on the land. So you really want to use your intuition and just familiarize yourself with the land and what it looks like. And the sustainability of the plant is also really important. The plant might be endangered. Maybe it's not super healthy one particular year. Have you harvested in that area maybe the last 2 or 3 years in a row? I like to give a lot of my areas a break, and I can tell a noticeable difference when I do that. And a lot of plants also have similar medicines, so there might be one that's not as abundant as another, and that might be the one you want to choose for that reason. So another lesson that is still hard, and I think it will always be hard, is how much is enough. And just like knowing about the plant that you're harvesting. I probably get a text a day from friends with a picture of a plant or a picture of a mushroom, and can I eat this? Is this edible? Is this medicinal? What can I use this for? So don't just, go and pick from the land. I mean, a lot of this is just common sense, but I think we'll all appreciate it if you just learn about the medicine before you go out and harvest it, and maybe how much is going to be enough for yourself or your family throughout the year. It took me a long time to learn this with stinging nettles. I always use nettle as an example, but it is one of my favorite plants. And I harvest about 8 of these kind of large Ziploc bags full, and I know that gets my family through like tea. And the very first couple of years I started to harvest nettle, I ran out, but there's always trade and good old Facebook. You can put a message out on Facebook, out of nettle, who wants to trade? And you'll be surprised how many people answer back and they've got something to trade. And mushrooms is always hard to leave extra mushrooms in the forest, but always nice to leave some for the other animals to enjoy. So some basics when I go out into the forest, I like to, first of all, I'm really careful and particular about who I harvest with. So making sure that they're fellow plant lovers and really respectful of the environment and the plants themselves. So there's some of my good friends up there in the top right. I also don't really skimp on my supplies because I do harvest so much. So I've gone through so many cheap pairs of clippers. So my recommendation would be to just, if you're going to, you're going to be harvesting a lot, get some really good scissors or a really nice pair of clippers. I should get royalties from Felco, but these are Felco, Felco, and they've lasted me for years. And they also have replacement parts, which I haven't even had to replace yet. But I think they range from a pair for $70 to like $110. I think these are like middle of the range ones, and they're so awesome. So I would recommend just getting good quality materials to harvest with. And if you have a favorite basket, I have a basket that's got some holes in the side. So when I'm mushroom picking, I'll walk through the forest knowing that the spores of the mushrooms are also kind of spreading along the ground. Also, it's just any bugs can crawl off at that time because you'd be surprised how many bugs are on these plants. And just an offering again, some good intentions. A snack, if you've got kids and you're out in the forest harvesting, it's always a good idea to bring snacks for your kids so they don't have any excuses to turn back. I learned that the hard way. A compass, and just good intentions. And if you can, it's always advisable to go out with somebody who really knows their plants. I have almost made the mistake many times of harvesting the wrong plant. So here is an excellent example of some lookalikes. The one on the, and actually they're all, at least in Cowichan territory here, they're all in season now. One of the ones on the bottom is more up in the mountains. But there's yarrow on the top left, and that's a really, we'll talk about it later. It's a really revered medicine, a really strong medicine, very, very common and easy to use, not dangerous in any way, but it looks a lot like the Queen Anne's lace, which you'll see on the sides of the roads everywhere right now. And that's not poisonous, it's just used for different purposes. But the one on the bottom left is water hemlock, and that is very, very poisonous and toxic, even to the touch. So you want to avoid water hemlock, and it's super invasive. I've seen it in many, many areas like parks down on the Quangin territory, an island view, and something you definitely want to stay away from. It can also resemble, I don't have it on a slide, but cow parsnip or wild rhubarb. They may call it yalla. I know many communities eat that, so it can look similar to that, and that also looks similar to giant hogweed. So you get my point, right? just be really careful when you're out there harvesting. And for anyone who's interested, the plant on the bottom right is osha, otherwise known as bear root, and that's a very sacred medicine that I haven't even harvested. I've been taught that you need to learn from an elder, and there's a very specific way and sustainable way to harvest that medicine up in the mountains. And that is really amazing medicine for the respiratory system, similar to our Indian celery or gakmin, very, very similar medicinal properties. There we go. And this, of course, is common sense, but always leave some for the birds and the bees. Many will harvest. There's a 5% rule, so you want to try not to take more than 5% of the plant itself. I think that's also hard to gauge because you don't really know if other people have harvested. Sometimes you can tell, sometimes you can't. But just a general rule is if the plant looks healthy and it's abundant, then I would say go ahead and take the 5%. Another thing that I've been guilty of is staying up way too late to process my medicines. I love these pictures so much. A couple of my team members and friends with Ice Bark, we harvest across the province when we're welcome into community for a lot of the work that we do. And this was up in Kitimat territory where our good friend Joe Grant invited us to his territory and lands, and we harvested some beautiful Indian swamp tea, otherwise known as Labrador tea on the right, and some rose hips. The day before, we harvested Devil's Club, and that should be just 2 days in itself. But needless to say, we were up until like the wee hours processing all of the medicines. But you really don't want to waste anything. Honor the plant that you've harvested as well as your commitment. But that's a tough lesson to learn, especially when you only got a couple days to harvest. And when in doubt, like we talked about earlier, throw it out. Not worth it. There's been a couple times I've been super tempted to harvest a mushroom that I'm just not 100% sure about. It looks so much like the pine mushrooms, and I was just like, no. So, but that's a hard one to learn as well. So, any questions so far? Okay, let's get into the fun stuff, right? Let's start talking about plants now. So I wanted to start off with stinging nettle, and this isn't something that is growing right now, but there is a second flush of stinging nettles that will come out shortly. So typically across the province, I know on Vancouver Island, this will start to come up in February some years, more typically March, April, and you can harvest it into May. Probably a lot of you have been stung by this plant. I don't know how many of you have eaten this plant, but there's so many benefits to using this for food and medicine. They call it the superfood. When you go into the stores and you see all of those containers of like the greens and they're all powdered and you pay like $1,000 for them, that's essentially guaranteed there would be stinging nettle in that. But that is something that really easily you can make yourself. You can harvest the stinging nettles for food when they're really small. And then for tea, as they get a little bit older, you just want to make sure with the nettle that it's something that you're harvesting before it goes to flower, because there's something that forms. It's a calcium crystal, and they're called cystoliths, and they can really be irritating to the digestive tract and your kidneys. So you just want to make sure you're harvesting nettle before it goes to flower. And I just dry the leaves, and there's so many amazing things you can do with that, but that could be another day completely in itself. I've seen nettles growing in parks on the side of the road. I have them pop up randomly here on my property, which I love, and I nurture them and I protect them because I want my own nettle patch. But you can find them also growing in dense forests. And they're just a great tonic. And in the herbalism world, a tonic basically just means something that you can use on a regular basis. It's just very nourishing for your body. And this is one of the first spring greens that comes out. And they say just, it's equipped with all of the vitamins and minerals and nutrients that you need after, like traditionally after a long winter, when food was scarce. Nettle can also be used for nets, and I was taught by one of my teachers where she would make like little nettle bracelets, and it is so strong. They've apparently found nettle cordage and fishing nets that is over 1,500 years old, still super strong and intact. And I believe that the German uniforms were made out of nettles in World War II. The seeds are high in omega. Just make sure that you moisten them up because they can still have little stings. But just like many of our nuts and seeds and oils, really healthy in the omegas. And the root is used for prostate health. So if you have, I think it's BPH, like benign prostatic hyperplasia, like essentially just like inflamed prostate, it's really effective for that in a tincture form. But if you, again, if you go to the health food store, many of the prostate medicines, if not all, will have nettle root powdered in it. And I just wanted to mention some lookalikes for the stinging nettle. They don't sting like the nettle, so if you're ever in doubt, you can touch them if you want. But the false nettle or hedge nettle in the middle grows in very, very similar places as stinging nettle. And if you pinch the leaves, it's just super smelly. My friend Stella uses this for a liniment for sore muscles, and a liniment is basically just a spray. So you can collect the leaves and infuse them in a witch hazel, chop them all up and cover them in witch hazel and soak them for a good month, strain it out, and then use that as a spray for sore muscles. She swears by it. I've never tried it just because this plant, again, it really stinks. It doesn't speak to me. And there's also the dead or purple nettle on the right, and many of you people use that not necessarily for a medicine, but more for its nutrition, and in salads as well. So I'm sure many of you recognize a lot of these plants. And goldenrod, this is a native plant, and this is out right now here in the mountains. I think the patches in the like Sook area as well as the Kwangin territory are also ready. It's such a beautiful, beautiful plant, and it grows on the roadsides, again, like many of the plants that we harvest for food and medicine, as long as it's clean. They grow in logging areas. And it's so it seems so out of place because all of a sudden you'll see these beautiful golden torches and there's like a big patch of goldenrod there. The bees have literally, when I've harvested, chased me down. In that picture I showed you earlier of me on the bike, I was harvesting goldenrod and they were chasing me down because they were so attracted to the goldenrod flowers. So a lot of the medicine for this, I use this as a tea, and I also make a tincture out of it, but it's highly anti-inflammatory and really specific for the respiratory tract, especially when there's like a buildup of mucus. And it's the herbal term is like anti-catarrhal, and that just means that it helps the body to get rid of all that mucus. So I harvest the leaves and the flowers just before they come out. So this might be just maybe a little bit late, but it doesn't matter. It's not bad for you if you harvest the flowers when they're like that. It just means that the family that it's in, they just turn to fluff more than anything. But it's kind of like spicy and lemony in taste. And this is part of my allergy blend. So you can use it in an allergy tea with stinging nettle and mint. You can also use it in an allergy tincture with a couple of other plants. Isn't it pretty? And red clover is done right now, but the cool thing about red clover is there is a spring red clover and there is also a fall red clover. So I've harvested mine in the spring. I have a very awesome friend, Jared, who lets me harvest on he's got hectares and hectares of land. So he always calls me and say, the clover's out, Robyn, and get over here before they mow the property. So this is his beautiful lands here up in Cowichan territory. And I use red clover for my lung tea. It's really great for like whooping cough or any respiratory illnesses like asthma or bronchitis. It's also really high in minerals, so just a really nutritious tea. And it dries really nicely. It dries like this really dark purple and dries really, really fast. It's also known as a woman's herb and it can help with menopause, menopausal symptoms, and PMS too. So I'm going to be going through menopause pretty soon, so I'll be using some red clover. The one thing you do want to worry, or just a warning that red clover contains something called a coumarin, and it's a blood thinner. So if you are on blood thinners already, you might want to avoid it or connect with your doctor and just make sure it's something safe for you. And I just learned that the fall red clover is higher in that than the spring. So this is why, I don't know, for some reason I just harvest the spring now. I also think that the spring is maybe just like a little more vibrant. But for tea, anything that's high in minerals like horsetail or red clover or nettle, you want to steep it for at least 20 minutes and it will really draw out a lot of the medicine. No questions so far? All right. Another plant you've probably seen is on the left. It's called pineapple weed, and it's a wild chamomile. And it's such a cute little plant. And unfortunately, you'd see it mostly growing out of parking lots. I have found it in one place that's been okay for me to harvest, and I've tried to propagate it without any luck. But it's awesome. So next time you see this plant, like stop and pick the little bulb, the little bulbous flower there, and smell it. And it smells like chamomile, but a little bit pineapple-y, and it's amazing. And if you're lucky enough to have this in your yard, like harvest them and dry them out. They kind of turn to powder. They're quite delicate, so you just have to be really careful once they are dry, just to put them in a jar. And all of the same properties as the chamomile, the German chamomile that you see on the right there. So just really nice and calming for the nervous system, helps with digestion. Chamomile can also be used to, chamomile tea bags to put over your eyes if they're sunburnt or just really tired from the computer, from like zooming all day like we're doing today. So that can really help to soothe your eyes. And I also love it for tea. But yeah, you'd be surprised how hard it is to find clean places to harvest weeds. It's really quite something. So you could try and grow your own. So mint is something that everybody knows about, and there is a wild mint, and here it is. And this is something that's also out right now. I love mint for nausea, digestion, headaches. I think most of us are familiar with mint. The one exception to the rule for mint is it's something that apparently is more, I guess it's stronger when it's in flower. So it's one of the plants that you want to harvest for the most potency when it's in flower, but that's not always possible, and you'll still get amazing medicine out of it if it's not. My mint fried this year up here. It got up to 43 degrees, so did not like it very much, unfortunately. So I'll be buying some mint this year. Mint is also really great for smokers who can have that dry throat. And my friend makes like a natural chew substitute from mint and cayenne, and she raves about it. But it's to me, it's like the salt of the plant world, and it really brings together so many of the flavors. So I put mint in a lot of my tea blends, and it just brings together all the flavors of the plants in such a nice way. And it's also just, it's calming, it's great for stress, and it's so nice tasting. Love mint. Love all the plants. So fireweed, another one that we're probably all familiar with. There's my son Coleman on the left there with our fireweed harvest last year. And it's such a beautiful picture of fireweed, but it's out there right now. Fireweed is such a cool plant because it's known as a pioneer species, and it builds a community of other plants around it to thrive in like disturbed areas, like many logging roads is where you'll see it. And it's so pretty. But it's really resilient. I always think of resiliency when I think of fireweed, just because of how it pops up in those disturbed areas. And it also makes our gut really resilient. So it's really specific to the small intestine and the colon, and it helps to create just like those perfect conditions for that good gut flora to really thrive. So I was always taught, and there might be other methods, but when you're feeding the gut and you want to promote that good bacteria, it's always good to do so in food or tea form versus like an extraction, like a alcohol extraction. And luckily I haven't had food poisoning recently, but this is something that's apparently very specific for when you're recovering from, when you're over the food poisoning and you want to get that good gut flora back, to drink some fireweed tea. I love a tea it's a heal the gut tea, and it's got plantain, marshmallow root, mint, calendula, and fireweed and licorice root, all really specific for healing the gut and the disturbed inflamed tissues. And a lot of those, if you're not going to go out and harvest them all, they're all available at many of the herb stores. I know that there's a couple in Victoria, and maybe where you live, there's a lot of herbal medicine that you can go and get the herbs in bulk. And there's also OM Foods, where you can order different sizes of a lot of these. I'm not sure about the fireweed, so if you want to harvest fireweed, go out and harvest them now. And I use the leaves, and I use a few of the flowers because they're mainly just really beautiful in the tea. They also dry a really dark purple. I have friends who also make a medicinal oil out of the herbs, or the flowers rather, for eczema, but I've never tried it. So there's all sorts of things you can do with fireweed.
Hi, Robyn. Before you moved on, we have one question in the chat.
Right.
So do you dry the flowers and add them to the tea as well, like for the mint plant?
For the mint? Ooh, that's a good question. I think so. I don't know what kind of properties they would have. I think most of the medicine and the volatile oils, it's a plant that's really high in volatile oils, would be in the leaves. But they certainly wouldn't be poisonous or anything. You could give it a try.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love this photo of your son. It's really cute.
Thanks. It makes me so happy.
Okay, just a reminder to everyone, if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand and then we can answer it live, or you can put it in the chat. And great.
Nice. So a couple more things about fireweed, just because I got to give it some special shout outs. The shoots, so the very young sprouts of the fireweed are edible. You can peel them and eat them like a spring vegetable. And when you're out in the mountains, maybe a couple weeks from now, and they start to dry out, the little, they form a seed pod, and those seed pods you can push on, and they release all of this white fluff, just like the dandelion seeds. And they're so beautiful. And I've heard that you can use that as a fire starter. Not that you would want to do that right now, but maybe you could save a couple of the seed pods and try it in the fall or the winter. I've always wanted to try that. There we go. And mullein, a plant that you'll see again on the sides of the roads. When I drive up to the interior, it's absolutely everywhere, and it kills me because I want to stop and harvest it because it's just so abundant and it just thrives up in those dry desert types of landscapes. But it's known as lung medicine, and it moves the mucus. It's a funny little medicine because it really eases coughing until it's successful in breaking up the phlegm, and then it kind of turns into like an expectorant, and then you all of a sudden start to cough up all of the mucus. And you can use the leaves for the tea, and other people smoke the leaves. I know Jerry, our elder, talks about using mullein and inhaling the smoke from mullein for all of those same characteristics and properties. A neat thing about mullein, and in the plant world, they call it like the doctrine of signatures. It's a fancy term for basically just physical characteristics that a plant would possess for the part of the body that it helps to heal. So when you think about your lungs and the little hairs that are like act like a filter for your lungs, so much of the lung medicine has like those little tiny hairs on the outside of them. The irony, though, for the mullein is if you are going to work with this plant and process it, is you should wear a mask because those tiny little hairs can just become airborne. And I've had them get into my throat and in my eyes, and they're really hard to get out and just become super irritating on your throat. So when I do, and I've only harvested mullein a couple of times. My friend grows it for me, but I kind of, like, not gonna lie, I kind of prefer to buy this one because it's so irritating, and I literally have to put on a mask and goggles when I'm working with mullein. I look like a crazy scientist, but it's a lot of work. But it is an awesome medicine. Again, for tea, there was an elder who shared with me last week about mullein that he makes a tincture out of it, and he uses it as a cough suppressant, and it's like really successfully for a lot of his community. So I'm gonna try that this year. The first year, the mullein plant just grows like a little basilette, I think it's called, on the bottom, so it won't shoot up like you see here. And I was wondering what was wrong with my plant last year, but it was just the first year growth. And then it doesn't really fully mature until the second year. And my mullein does not look like this plant. I wish it did. Another very interesting thing about mullein is you can use the flowers for earaches and infuse them in an olive oil. They're not all ready at the same time, so you might have to just put like a little bit of oil in a jar and just, every day pick a couple flowers and add it and just let that kind of infuse in the sun for as long as possible. And a lot of the ear oils that you'll see in the natural food stores will have like mullein, St. John's wort, and garlic, or a variation of those ones. I'm not prone to earaches, but I do have a lot of parents and their kids are and they use mullein oil, and they really, really like it for that. So mullein is also available and ready now in most places. Rose hips, not quite yet, but they're coming. They're coming this fall. And the rose hips here where I live, unfortunately, we don't get, well, unfortunately for some reasons, but we don't get a lot of like frost here. But that is what makes the rose hips super sweet. So I like to trade for the rose hips in the interior or up north. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we haven't been able to harvest our rose hips in the last year and a half. So I'm completely out of them right now. But in those areas where that you do get a frost and you can still see just how beautiful and vibrant they are on the right, that's when you want to harvest them. And you can just twist off that little top and let them dry. And on the left, you can see the picture of they've been processed. So you can, if you want to go to the extreme to open up every single one and take the little hairy seeds out, go for it. But it takes so long. And you can, if you're using it just for tea, you can totally use it with the little hairy seeds on the inside. It's not going to irritate anything. And you can also eat. So if you're out in the wilderness and you just want to have a little nibble, get a little bit of vitamin C into your system, you can nibble the fleshy red part and the white part inside, but just avoid the seeds. Apparently they cause something called itchy bum. And I guess you can use your imagination and figure out why. But they're super high in pectin. So many people use them as a pectin substitute or as a thickener. But you can also buy rose hips too. I think they're pretty abundant. All right, we're gonna start talking about first aid now, but I thought that we'd have maybe just like a little stretch. You know, we've been sitting for, we've been sitting for almost 45 minutes. So if you wanna just, I'm gonna lead just a little bit of a stretch and you can follow along if you want, or if you wanna take a couple minutes and do your own thing or have a restroom or a tea break. But I'm just in my chair here, so I'm gonna get up and I'm gonna do a couple chair squats up and down. So I'm gonna do 5 of those. Nice and slow. This always helps me focus a little bit more, and I always feel a lot better after I get up after sitting for a while. And I'm gonna stay standing here, but if you prefer, you can stay seated. And I'm going to do some jumping jacks, but I'm not going to jump. I'm just going to basically move my right leg out and down, and then my left leg. You could also do this in your chair just to get that circulation flowing. Let's do a few more of those. Savannah's yawning. Wake up, Savannah. And then a really high reach to the sky and a big stretch, reach as high as you can. And then try and touch your toes if you can. Oh my goodness, I can feel that on the back of my hamstrings. Feels so much better. Let's do that one more time because it felt so good. Reach high and then try and touch the floor if you can. As far as you can go safely. All right, and then I'm going to sit back in my chair and just do a couple neck stretches, and then we'll start talking about first aid. So yeah, I'm just going to go up and down just as it's comfortable. Don't push it too much. I used to have really bad neck issues, so my doctor gave me all of these stretches. So this is like the yes stretch, and then there's the no stretch. So elbow to shoulder on both sides, kind of pausing a little bit in the middle. Couple more. And then the last one, we'll just bring our shoulders up to our ears, up, down, and then back. I'll do that 2 more times. Up, down, and then back. Whew. All right. You guys feel better now? I feel better.
I also feel better. Thank you, Robynne.
You're welcome.
We do have a question in the chat. I don't know if you want to answer that now or just a few more minutes for our break. What do you think?
Let's go for it.
Okay. So Pearl asks, where may I purchase these plants in Toronto from an Indigenous person or business?
In Toronto, ooh, that is a very, very good question. A lot of, at least the Indigenous plant people that I know will trade more than have like for profit businesses, because it's just so hard to harvest in abundance. So I'll trade for certain people, but if I do buy and choose to sell, because I know it's also my responsibility if I'm going to be teaching about this, a lot of people are going to want access to that medicine, but I can't harvest enough for everybody. But I do have a couple of key people that I purchase from that I know are work with ethical fair trade farmers, and the farmers grow the medicines themselves. So I think it's OM Foods, and I can check on that later, or maybe Savannah can send that out and we can chat later. There's OM Foods, there's Mountain Rose Herbs, and they're in the States, but they're also highly recommended. And Harmonic Arts sells blends, but they don't sell individual herbs mainly. They're a little bit pricey. So yeah, I would recommend OM or Mountain Rose Herbs. And I don't know, I know a lot of Indigenous medicine makers who will sell like more like salves or maybe more like cosmetic products, but not so much the teas. Actually, there is Laughing Lichen, Lichen, in the Northwest Territories, and you could check them out. I think they may sell in smaller quantities. So this is not my first aid kit. I wish it was, but it's going to be one day. I'm not that organized, but it has similar things in it, just doesn't look quite as pretty. But I always strive to put a lot of the herbal medicines in my first aid kit, but also know how to use them when I'm out in the wilderness and when they're available, like right now. So we're going to spend the next half an hour or so talking about some plants that you can use yourself for home remedies. I get very excited when I talk about this stuff because I've seen it work.
Robyn, are we going to learn more about the yarrow plant?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you.
Oh yeah, no problem. So starting off with fur tips, and I know like when you think about first aid, you might think of like a scrape or a burn or a cut or something. But I've also been high up on the mountain. We run basketball camps, and we take our players up about 2,000 feet. And I had a girl bonk on me. And for those of you who don't know what bonking means, it basically just means you crash. Like you've just got nothing left. You run out of energy. And I had nothing. I didn't have a power bar. I didn't have Gatorade or even electrolyte like drops. But there was fur tips, and so we gave her a few to nibble on. And what fur tips are high in just like natural electrolytes and vitamin C. So we call it nature's Gatorade. And these can be harvested in early spring. So here about May, June, depending on the farther up north you go, but you can't miss them. They look like little decorations or little Christmas lights. On the fur, there's the balsam fir. Some people, there's grand fir, hemlock and spruce for those of you up north. There's a little bit of spruce here. Just the only one I wouldn't use is the yew tree, because the yew can be poisonous. But you can use most evergreen tips for this purpose. And you can nibble on them. So, you know, they do taste really good. And I've had a couple when I've just really lacked energy and I've been out in the bush, and they really, really help. So these are the tender shoots here. I don't know why my forward isn't working. And some of the methods for the tea for the fresh one. So when I go out and harvest these, I'll harvest a good Ziploc bag full, and we actually do workshops across the province and teach people how to do this. But a really popular way that people like to enjoy them is called like a solar infusion. And that's just on the right side. So you just get a handful of them and put them into, that's like one of the really large mason jars. I don't know if it's 32 or 54 ounces, something like that. And put it out in the sun for, I think, a minimum of 3 hours. Some people do like half day or 6 hours, and just let the sun extract the medicine. And it's like a beautiful, like lemony, just a really beautiful flavor. and you'll get the medicine of the plant and a lot of the vitamins and the vitamin C in it and electrolyte properties. You can also store those. So if you want to have them for the winter time when you might need it a little bit more, they freeze really well in a Ziploc bag, just the green fresh tips. I also have a friend who dries them, and he likes to just keep them in a jar and just does like a regular steeping, like how you would just steep a normal tea. But yeah, all sorts of different ways that you can infuse these.
Robyn, we have a question. Are you harvesting only the light green tips?
I am here. Well, I'm not. That's Daniel. But yes, usually I do, but it's also completely fine. And thank you for asking. It's completely fine to use the older twigs too. So when they're not light green like that, you can use like as close to the tip, because then you're still going to get that first year growth. It's just not going to be quite as fresh. And you can completely use that when you're out in the forest. We go camping, and I watch this show called Alone. They basically drop off like 9 people and with like 10 pieces of equipment, and that's it. And they're always drinking like fir tip tea. So you can use the older ones as well. That's a great question.
And then we had another question about nettle.
Mm-hmm.
I have read that once the nettle flowers, once the nettle flowers and it is dried, it is okay for tea, but contrary to teachings that it should only be used before flowering.
So can you ask that person, do they use the flowers for the tea, or are they harvesting the leaves when the plant is in flower?
That question was from Myrna. If you wanted to unmute yourself, and we could.
Yes, it was just the leaves, not the flowers.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and I can't recall where I read that. I've heard it more than once, and I was like, oh, that's not what I learned. So just want clarification.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have learned that from both of my teachers, not to harvest the nettle while it's in flower, because it forms a calcium crystal called a cystolith that can be really hard on the kidneys. So
Right.
I haven't, and I don't, I'm not sure how much research there is out on that, but it is pretty common practice. And I have done some Google searches on it. It just seemed to be pretty common practice.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and there is a second flush of the nettles. I think I just touched on it earlier. I prefer the spring nettles, but if you are too busy in the spring, and because there's so much to harvest in the spring, there will be another flush of them coming out really, really soon. They're not quite as like vibrant as the spring nettles, but they're still good medicine. And I know many people who will go to harvest those before. So if you miss it or it's in flower, the older ones, you can get the newer ones soon.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. No problem. And another thing that's big here on the West Coast is licorice fern root. I see this growing mainly on the big leaf maples. It also grows on rocks, as you can see on the left there. I haven't harvested them from the rocks. I've heard that they're not as sweet as the ones that grow on the big leaf maple. But this is something that you can just pull back the moss really carefully, and you go ahead and grab the root that you see, like it's got the moss that's covered on it, and just peel that away, and you can suck on that. It really, really helps for a cough or a sore throat. And you can dry that if you want, and you can make a honey out of it. You can just dry it to suck on later. If you don't have access to these types of plant, there is another type of licorice that you can buy in any herb store, and those usually sell it in little pieces or in big sticks. And that's a great thing for your first aid kit as well, or if you're camping. My son, who, like most kids, they love sugar. They love how it makes them feel. They love the taste of it. I like to try and limit him to a sweet thing like once a week, and he'll have, sugar is highly addictive. And this is something that is a really great remedy for if you're craving sugar. you can suck on this licorice root. It's very, very, very sweet, and it completely helps with this sugar craving. So if you're trying to eliminate sugar from your diet, I highly recommend trying the licorice root for that. One thing you can do, if you do have access to this fresh plant, you can chop it up really small and just cover it up with like a 40% vodka and let that soak for a month and shake it every day, and then strain it out, put it in like a spray bottle, and you can spray that, and it's really, really sweet underneath your tongue for sugar cravings. And that way maybe it's just a little more like at the ready for you in your in your medicine cabinet or something. A warning with the licorice root, though, is that it can raise blood pressure. So if you do have high blood pressure, it's probably something that you might want to avoid. And I know this is not a plant, but I had to talk about it. I think if you've ever spent any time at the beach, you've probably seen bladder. It's like fucus. Some people will call it rockweed. And seaweed is an algae, but I did want to talk about this because if you're ever at the beach and you forget your sunscreen, there's a slime and a gel inside of the bladder, and it's natural. It's a natural sunscreen. So you can pop them open and rub it on your face, and you won't smell, I promise. I've done it many, many times when I've seaweed harvested and I have forgotten my sunscreen, and it works really great. I think it's because it's like one of the most terrestrial of the seaweeds. Like it's a low tide. You can see it at the low tide zone, so it's exposed for a lot of the day. So it needs to be equipped with that sun protection. It's very, very cool. I also like to eat these, not for first aid purposes, but it's really great. There's iodine in seaweeds, and it's really great for the thyroid. But I just like the taste of these, so I dehydrate them. And I also have a couple of friends who dehydrate them with like powdered cheese, and they call them like Cheetos. But they dehydrate really, really nicely if you've got an even dehydrator, and they're really, really crunchy, and I eat them with rice and fish. But typically you'll see the bladder for thyroid medicine in the pharmacy, and it's powdered and capsuled because a lot of people don't want to eat that.
Robynne, before I move on, are they naturally salty?
Yes. Yeah. And when I was taught to harvest seaweed, and even when I was little harvesting, it's something that people just usually will rinse the seaweed in the ocean water. They won't rinse it in fresh water. Some people do, I think, and it will decrease the amount of saltiness. But I also believe that there's just like a lot of just natural medicine sort of in that. And I like the salt. I actually like to grind up my seaweed too and use it as a salt substitute. A little bit healthier for you. But if you do forget your sunscreen and your bladder and you do end up with a sunburn, you can use aloe vera. This is something I think we all grew up with, and it's often forgotten. But it's something that I keep in my place. I have an aloe vera plant, and there really is nothing better for burns than good old aloe vera gel. You just pick it off fresh from the plant. And if you don't have that, or maybe you don't have enough light in your home for the plant to thrive, you can buy aloe gel in most stores. I've seen it at the Pharmasave or those health food stores. So aloe is great. My one teacher also talked about just having like little moles on your face. Just, I don't know if you get older, maybe age spots or something. And her friend just used some aloe on this little like on barnacle-y type of mole on her face straight for 2 weeks, and then it completely disappeared. So that's maybe something that you want to try. Black tea is also something you can use for sunburns or keep in your first aid kit if you're camping, because it's really high in tannins, and they say the cheaper the tea, the higher in tannins it is. So red rose is one that can be recommended for something cheap to put in your first aid kit, so you can moisten it and put it on a sunburn, and it can be really soothing and tightening, toning for your inflamed skin. And vanilla leaf is such a cute little plant. So what I'd like to do with vanilla leaf, and this is still out now, although the little flower in the middle there has now turned to seed, but you can still get some that are quite nice and green. And neat thing about this plant is it doesn't smell like vanilla when it's fresh, but as it starts to dry, it has a really strong vanilla scent. And the flies and the insects just don't like that for whatever reason. So traditionally it was used to hang in homes and cabins to repel those insects. So I thought, oh, it would be kind of cool to actually to try and infuse this in witch hazel and see if that worked in a spray. So I dried it, I just hung it to dry, and it doesn't really take that long to dry. And it does, it smells like this tobacco and vanilla, it's just this beautiful scent. And then I crumble it up and I put witch hazel. And I usually will use like a witch hazel with alcohol, or half witch hazel with alcohol and then half non-alcohol, just because you do need a little bit of alcohol to extract the medicine as best as possible. And again, just chopping it all up, just covering it, letting it soak for a month, stirring it up, and then you can strain it and have it ready for the summer, or you can even make this now and bottle it up and use it as an insect repellent. And it works really well. Like if I was camping in the middle of like, I don't know, like lake country, I might not use it because I hate mosquitoes. But here, like for my purposes, when I'm outside at dusk and there are like quite a few mosquitoes, it works really well. You just need to reapply it like probably every 30 minutes. And I also add in a couple insect repelling essential oils, like you can use citronella or lemon eucalyptus or lavender, and just shake it up before you use it, because the essential oils will just end up floating on top of your liquid because it's not soluble. So give it a good shake and spray it on. And it's a really beautiful smelling insect repellent, and it works quite well. You can do that with sage too. So I think sage grows many different types of sage. You could dry that and infuse the sage in witch hazel and add some essential oils. I've done it with the coastal sage, and I really like it.
Robyn, could vanilla leaf work as a food extract if you infused it in vodka?
No, it wouldn't taste like it. I've tried to put it in a smoke mix, and it doesn't even, like, it doesn't draw that well. No, it's completely different plant. Good question. And so that's what it can end up looking like once it's all strained. Just get yourself a little glass bottle and you can use that as your repellent. So if anybody wants more details, I know I'm covering like a lot of plants, I'm super keener, but we can always, I don't mind sharing recipes, or if there's questions, Savannah can connect us later, and I'll give out my social media information as well. Just know where to stop, you know?
Robyn, I have a question about the bladder plant.
Mm-hmm.
You said that you could like rinse it in ocean water to keep, like, preserve the saltiness. Is there like a specific beach that you would do that at? Like, would you, like, I wouldn't want to do that like in Vancouver because I think yeah. But where do you harvest?
I was always taught to harvest in the really cold kind of coastal areas. So sort of I harvest on the West Coast on any of the beaches that are accessible there. I try and just follow the tide charts. There's a few low tides, like 0 to 1 foot tides, starting from May to July, that are really good for seaweed harvesting. I know in Haida Gwaii, they harvest seaweed all year, or they do most of their seaweed harvesting in the winter time. But yeah, I would be really careful, of course, the environment. I would try and ask around. I think Island Health, if you're on the island, I don't know if other health authorities have done this, did some research. They worked with some Indigenous communities and researched the, I guess, like the levels of contamination in certain communities' seaweed. So that information might be out there at some of the health authorities. But typically you do want the coastal, like the changing water, like the, you know, it's not a lot of like, obviously not a lot of boats. You don't want to harvest at like a marina or anything like that where there could be gasoline and other contaminants. And my first teacher taught me that you should look behind you, and there should be like a big rocky cliff, and that should be like way up high. And that's what you know, I don't know. I would just say to try and do your best research as possible. But the West Coast has always been good to me for seaweed harvesting.
Thank you.
Yeah. So comfrey, this is a really common, it's not a native plant, but it's an awesome plant. It's really something typical that you find in farmers' gardens, or just if you're a gardener and grow vegetables, because the bees love these little flowers. And I think it's like a nitrogen fixer as well. I'm not a big gardener, but I see them in everybody's home gardens. Another name for comfrey, you might hear it being referred to as bone knit. And this is something that you can use as a poultice for broken bones to help heal them, as well as torn ligaments or sprains. And it's got something in it called allantoin, and it basically just speeds up cell regeneration, so you heal much faster. So there are a couple of ways you can use this. So right now, comfrey it's almost done up here, but you can, if you happen to injure yourself and you've got the fresh plant, that's always amazing. So you just want to like mash up the fresh plant, add a little bit of water with like a mortar and pestle maybe, stick it in like a cheesecloth or a muslin bag like that, and pop it right on your skin. I would recommend not using, like, I would mash the leaf, because there's little hairs on comfrey too that can be irritating to your skin. My cousin tried using just the leaf and she got a rash, and then she mashed it next time. And she also used my salve and didn't get the rash. So I think that could just be a little bit irritating to your skin. But this is called a poultice. And some poultices also, you can chew it up, and it's called a spit poultice because your saliva can also be very healing. But I wouldn't recommend that with the comfrey, just because it's a little bit hairy. And also, if this is something that you want to use and you're not going to make your own salve, you could harvest the leaves and dry them. And I've got an example here, and really crunchy. And if you had an injury in the off season when comfrey wasn't growing fresh, you could just rehydrate this and make a poultice at that time. So I would try and maybe keep like 40 of these on hand. Some people use the comfrey root as well. I have a few times, but I don't have really access to tons of comfrey root. I tried to harvest it and my plant just didn't look very good the next year. So I just I stick to the leaf, but there's a lot of people who really like the root. They say it's higher in the allantoin than the leaf, which is probably true. I do want to tell one story though about this. I've got two friends, and their mothers were herbalists, and they both played varsity basketball in Ontario, and they sprained ankles, of course, very common in the basketball world, and they would heal so much faster than all of the other athletes. So finally, the athletic therapist said, like, "What the heck are you guys doing? Like, you're coming back like in a way quicker time than the rest of your teammates." And they said, "Oh, well, we're using comfrey, and this is what our mother does." And they implemented it into the athletic therapy at the university, and probably in some type of salve form. And maybe that's another workshop that Savannah can invite me. Maybe we'll do it in person and we'll make like a medicinal salve. And basically what that is we've talked about soaking these plants in alcohol. You would do the same, but you soak it in an oil, and different methods for different plants, but then you have that medicinal oil. And there's a process where you melt beeswax and just add it to the oil to make a salve. And I would love to come back another time and we can make a medicinal salve together. But just different ways to use it fresh, or you can dry it, or you can make an oil out of it. And the internet is a wonderful thing. There's tons of good information out there on how to make a medicinal oil, and you could even Google how to make a comfrey oil, and it's all out there. But the one thing about comfrey that you have to be careful of is it has a lookalike, and a super, super poisonous one. And this one got me. This got me this year. So we have in the Victoria place where I reside part-time during the school year, comfrey is just everywhere. It just, I don't know, it just grows wild. And or foxglove, and it popped up in my comfrey garden, and the leaves look almost identical. So you can see the comfrey leaf on the left side and then the foxglove on the right. So it wasn't in flower yet. And I wanted to harvest it, but I was just like, it just looks like a little bit different. And the good thing about it though is a foxglove is more like, this makes sense. It's fuzzier, and the comfrey is hairier. So the comfrey is almost like a little pricklier than the foxglove, but don't do it, you know, because they're super poisonous until it's in flower. And then foxglove, unmistakable flowers. They come in purple, magenta, white, pink, and those are the foxglove flowers in this picture versus the comfrey flowers. And they might look similar in this photo, but they're really not. So I would make sure to, because like I said, it happened to me this year. I almost harvested it, and then I was like, no. So just be really, really careful of this one if you are going to use it. Big lookalike. Oh, yay, we finally get to talk about plantain. It's one of my favorite plants, just like all the other ones. So there's two different types. There's the broadleaf, which you see on the left, and then there's the narrow leaf. Some people will call this white man's foot because they say it came from the seeds were transplanted here on like the Europeans' sneakers, and then it just kind of propagated and showed up everywhere. But this is a medicine that I use a lot internally for lungs, but I also love it topically for first aid. It's known for its like drawing properties, so it draws out infection and it draws out venom for first aid. And it's more known for its like demulcent, like soothing properties on our mucous membranes, for if you're going to use it internally, like in a lung tea. So where do I even begin with talking about plantain? I'm going to go to the next slide. So this is a very fresh wasp sting. It was taken after about 6 wasp stings, probably a good hour afterwards. And again, just like the comfrey, if you have access to the fresh plant of plantain, I would definitely use that. And plantain is also edible. Some people will eat plantain as a salad. I find it like a little bit woody, so I don't eat it. I use it for medicine. But what you can do is you can take a big hunk of it and just chew it all up, get as much of your own saliva in there as possible, and make a spit poultice and pop that right on like the area of the sting and wrap it up. I've used this so many times. I ran into a huge wasp nest last year because I got greedy and I brought my clippers and I was harvesting Himalayan blackberries, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna go and get like the deep ones in the bush. So I kind of cut my way through the bush thinking, you know, I was being good for the environment at the same time. And then there was like a few wasps around me, and I'm so used to that, I kind of ignored it. And then all of a sudden it was like, zoom, a swarm of wasps. I got about 20 stings. And the first thing I went to was plantain. This is out in the Wanda Fuca type of area. And I made my spit poultice and it helped like so much. So people that I care about, I usually give this as a gift. Like if you've got kids at home and you don't have plantain in your own backyard, but I bet you many of you do, you can buy this from, there's a Fireweed farm, or you can just take it, a cutting, or just dig out the root from wherever you do see it and propagate it. It's so easy to propagate and keep it in a pot, and it will come back year after year. And so the spit poultice from the fresh plant is always a great way to use the medicine. But if you don't have it fresh, I also dry my plantain. So I'll harvest it anytime is fine. It doesn't matter if it's in flower. But again, you just want to use your intuition and make sure the plant is really healthy. And you can powder it. So I have an herb grinder. It's a coffee grinder, but it's got a sign on it saying herbs only. So nobody uses it for coffee. But you can have like a magic bullet or a Vitamix and just powder up your dried plantain, which is what I did in the top right picture. And you can just use that alone, moisten it with some water. But if you have something called bentonite clay, it's like BENONITE, and clay is also really known for like its drawing properties. You could mix, and you can get that at any health food store too, bentonite clay, and mix the two together, and it's an awesome into a paste, and it's an awesome remedy for any kind of bite or sting. Can speak to that firsthand.
Robyn, Brooke just has her hand up.
Mm-hmm.
I just had a quick question about your spit poultice and your example of those horrible 20 bites from a wasp, 20 stings. So I'm just thinking, I don't have a lot of spit, so I don't know if I would have enough to put over everything that's swollen. So I'm wondering, are you supposed to put it on like everything that's swollen, or just sort of like the site of where the wasp stung, like so that it enters the body at that point? Or how do you use it?
Yeah, good question. So if you don't have enough saliva, you could, and you've got a water bottle, you could try and moisten up your mouth with that and create a little bit more saliva, or just use the water too. It's just, your saliva has its own healing properties in it. So that's totally fine. And I like to cover as much of the area as possible, because it will kind of spread out. And so, but just my intuition says kind of where it's sort of starting to expand a little bit, you might want to kind of put it on, just like an infection, right? You can kind of see how it's getting bigger and bigger. I would start with that, and hopefully you might have enough though for the whole area. It shouldn't be hopefully too big of an area. These are pretty extreme situations that I'm talking about, that I had so many, and this, that picture before was six stings, because there's like actually running into a nest versus just like a one single sting.
Right. So just cover whatever you can, as much as you can.
Whatever you can. Okay. Yeah. And using water is fine.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Robyn, I also have a question. For plantain, like this medicine, would you just use it on bug bites, or could you use it on like any other skin, like eczema or anything like that?
Yeah, lots of people use it in combination with like calendula or lavender, or oats for eczema. Some people even use comfrey for eczema. I buy something for eczema only because it's something that's worked for my kids ever since they were little. I get something called Dream Cream from Lush, and just use a tiny bit of that for eczema. But there are many medicine people who make awesome remedies for eczema. And luckily we don't really have the eczema anymore, so I haven't really had to formulate something on my own. But plantain is, it's awesome for skin, for wound healing. So again, if you can make an oil and have access to that oil, I make a stick, it's called Bite Me. It's actually in our prize kit. And so if I don't have access to plantain, I make it like in a little first aid size lip balm container, and I just rub it on, and I put lavender and mint in there anytime I get a mosquito bite. So it's great for itch. It's also great for infection. And I used it for, I don't know why spiders always seem to bite you in the middle of the forehead, but I had a huge spider bite, like a big round spider bite right in the middle of my forehead. And I put the Bite Me stick on it, and by the evening it was like completely gone. And the itch was gone too. It was super itchy. So I wanted to show you guys the after picture. I kind of spoiled it earlier, but this is the next day after keeping the poultice on. And I kept it on until like bedtime and then took it off, but it was on for a good couple hours. So there's the before, and then there's the after. I didn't get a picture of my elbow last year or my arm last year because I was too traumatized, but it was really, really, really similar. So yay, now we can talk about yarrow. And how many slides? Okay, I've got 10. I'm gonna whiz through these because I know people have to probably get back to work after their lunch hour. But yarrow is, and some people call it yarrow, it's like the potato kind of thing. But both of my teachers say that if there was only one plant left on this earth and they could choose one, what would it be? And this is what they say. It's very, very powerful medicine. It's antibacterial, antiviral, and it's also known as an anticoagulant. So it stops bleeding. So for the purposes, yarrow is another thing we could talk about all day long, but for the purposes of this presentation, it's great for bleeding. And I've used this now a couple times on my family members, including my son's guinea pig. We had cut the guinea pig's nails and we cut past the quick and it was just bleeding. It was like 11 o'clock at night, nothing was open. We tried everything. We applied pressure, wrapped it up. And then finally I'm like, oh, I've got some dried yarrow tea. And so we powdered it up and we put it on there and just applied pressure with like a little cotton ball. And it like completely stopped the bleeding. And same with my son who was making arrows out of ocean spray or ironwood. And he cut towards himself and had a horrible cut. So we put the yarrow on and then we took him to the clinic. and the doctor like couldn't believe that it had stopped the bleeding. It also has like an analgesic properties in it, so it numbed it. It's because it's antibacterial. It was, you know, helping it to keep it clean and infection free. So he was asking me all these questions, and he wanted to like implement this into his practice. So it's an awesome medicine. So I dry mine. Again, for the same reason that it's not always fresh, right? These plants only last for really a couple weeks or a month in season. But I have a good example of a dried yarrow, and I would use the leaves and the flowers. And the leaves there, you can see they're quite feathery. So when we talked about the lookalikes before, the leaves are just so different. And this one is not in the carrot family. All of the other ones are in the carrot family. So they have a very distinct kind of parsley looking leaf. So the yarrow leaf is very, very different. And you can pinch it and really smell the medicine in this plant. So sorry, we're running out of time. So again, just because we were talking about the yarrow, I wanted to revisit that slide with the lookalikes. But another great thing to do is I always keep this in my first aid kit. And in my medicine cabinet at home, always have it on hand. And like I say, unfortunately, I've used it too many times. But when you have boys, active boys, and you live in the wilderness, it sort of happens, right? But while we're on yarrow, I'll bypass the other ones pretty quick. But does anyone have questions about yarrow? Probably another workshop. Hey, Savannah.
Yeah, I have so many questions, but I'm like, we only have 10 minutes left.
I know, I can't believe we're running out of time. Geez, yeah, I told you what happened when I talked about plants. So here's like a good example of something I call wound warrior. So it's got plantain oil, yarrow oil. I think I'm going to try calendula in it this year. And I put in a couple drops of lavender and chamomile essential oil. And this is something I would trade for. So if anybody trades that's online, they want to get in touch with me, I'm going to be making a new batch of this. But I would love to come back and teach you guys how to make this particular salve. That would be fun. Maybe not online, but I don't know how we all do that in person. Couldn't talk about first aid without talking about pitch. And this is a picture actually from a hike I did the other day on the left. And somebody had taken a big hunk of this tree out. I don't really know why, of the bark, but it was just dripping with pitch. And this is something, if you're bleeding and you have access to it, you can see little pitch blisters many of the times in like pines, but you can find pitch anywhere. And if it's dripping like that, you can use it right on your wound. It works very much like a polysporin, like the natural polysporin people call it. And then this beautiful pitch is from Cannon Lake area, where they have just jewels and jewels of big hunky pieces of pitch. I am never lucky enough to find something like that, but just like a natural polysporin, you would use it the same way if it's fresh, but you can also melt it down and put it in a little bit of beeswax, or some people use Vaseline if you don't have beeswax, and it's also cheaper, just so you can use it throughout the year and don't have to melt it down every time you need it. Well, actually, I'm almost done. And I would be a bad medicine woman if I didn't talk about arnica. And this isn't something, you can grow this on your own, but this is a plant that you can get at any store. It's Arnica montana, and it's an amazing medicine you can use it topically for sprained ankles, but internally, so there's a picture on the left-hand side, that's like a homeopathic. So you twist it, and they're these they taste like little sugar balls, and you don't touch them, you put them under your tongue. But something awesome I always have these in my purse. I've heard so many stories about people who have been in like car accidents or have had like a major fall or trauma, and they get arnica into their system right away. And just the benefits of it are huge, and just way less sore the next day, or like barely even feeling the pain. So it's something, if used properly and immediately, can work really, really well. And it's just available, right? So why wouldn't you have it in topical form or internal form there? Geez, and that's it. Wow, look at me go. It's 12:28. We got 2 minutes left. Sorry I took so long. I hope that we have time for questions. I can certainly stick around for questions. But yeah. Thank you for listening, everybody. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And there's my social media handles if anybody wants to follow me or get in touch with me. I'm wild about plants.